Thank you all for coming tonight. It's so great to have a nice big crowd. We are also so pleased to be gathered together with you and this wonderful panel of artists. So just a little bit about the exhibition. The exhibition's origin was in an interest that Carrie had in doing a show concerned with the scientific method and the uncertainty principle, or sometimes called the Heisenberg principle. I suspect this comes out of Carrie's work, which maybe we get to talk about today a little bit, which of course is based on images in the science of astronomy. When she brought the idea to me, we ended up mulling it over, rethinking it, examining it from all different kind of angles until we centered on a combination of the investigative and the subjective. And as we constructed the show, from the artists we researched and the ideas we found in their work, we found there were two basic touch points for the exhibition. The scientific method, the basics of which I'm just going to say now so we can talk about this if we need, which are ask a question, conduct background research, offer a hypothesis, test the hypothesis in an experiment, analyze the data, and draw a conclusion. The second touch point, as I said, we actually moved from the uncertainty principle to the observer effect, which applies in physics, psychology, and computational information technology, and can be described very briefly as the changes that an act of observation will make on a phenomenon that is being observed. So these are the lenses of the exhibition for the two of us. But moreover, we began thinking about broader questions such as why the scientific method, however loosely we use it in reference to the artworks, might frame, structure, or give grounding to knowledge and understanding in the rapidly changing world in which we live. You can imagine at a certain point we kind of encountered the question for ourselves of whether the process of research and subjective inflection might not be universal to all contemporary practice, and maybe this is something we can mull over tonight. But what we wanted to do in gathering these works together in the show is present a breadth of forms and forms of observation and investigation. And the works that we gathered are a sample, an exemplary kind of collection. And the show itself, I think, is, for me, maybe it's for Carrie too, an examination. And maybe tonight's conversation could be our own experiment in hopes of answering our questions. So I'm going to turn over to Carrie, who's going to introduce everybody in the order that they'll present.
First off, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all the artists for being here. And it's so nice to have you guys in person who haven't been here all along or at the opening. Also, a big thank you to the Gallery 400 staff who worked so hard on this show. Many of you. It's a big staff. And they were wonderful. And especially to Lorelei, who worked very hard to help me to put this together with me. And I'm just very grateful, because I think it surpassed what I was thinking about. So thank you. Okay, so to introduce the artists that in order of their presentations, Steve Roden is a visual and sound artist from Los Angeles. His work includes painting, drawing, sculpture, film, video, sound installation, text, and performance. He has been exhibiting his visual and sound work since the mid-1980s and has had numerous solo and group exhibitions internationally and most recently at the Berkeley Art Museum, California, and the Mendel's Collections in Houston. Rhoden has performed his soundworks at various art spaces and experimental music festivals worldwide. Since 1993, he has released numerous CDs under his own name as well as under the moniker In Between Noise on various record labels. He received his MFA from the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena and his BFA from Otis Parsons in Los Angeles. Over the past 15 years, he has taught both graduate and undergraduate courses at numerous Southern California institutions. Jessica Hyatt is a recent MFA graduate of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and previously attended Massachusetts College of Art and Central St. Martin's College. She currently works at the Art Institute of Chicago and opens a solo exhibition next Friday, March 8th at 3 Walls here in Chicago. Steffani Jemison is an artist and a writer who has exhibited her work, screened moving image works, and read her literary work at numerous venues nationally and internationally. She completed residencies at the core program of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Project Row Houses, the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and the International Studio and Curatorial Program, New York. Jameson earned a BA from Columbia University and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She is currently an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, where her work is included in the current exhibition 4 through March 10th, and she's a visiting lecturer at Wellesley College. This is lengthy. Julia Fish has presented her work in 21 solo exhibitions since 1980 and was the subject of a 10-year survey exhibition, View, at the Renaissance Society at the University of Chicago in 1996. She has exhibited in numerous group exhibitions internationally, including the 2010 Whitney Biennial, among many others. She received a BFA degree from the Pacific Northwest College of Art and an MFA degree from the Maryland Institute College of Art. She is a professor of studio arts here at UIC. Also, Julia will have work in the upcoming show, Homebodies, curated by Naomi Beckworth at the MCA in June. I look forward to that.
Thank you. I think we decided
So I'm just going to talk about what I've been working on since the middle of 2011. It's a body of work that is not remotely completed. It's work that I've been, I went to Berlin in 2011 to do a research project in Walter Benjamin's archives. It took me 7 years to get permission because I'm not part of an academic institution and I'm not working on a PhD. I also don't speak or read German. But I had seen this piece of paper about 10 years ago. It's part of a series of notes from one of his notebooks. It's a long conversation what this actually means, some of which I'm not entirely sure of. But basically there are theme symbols that were distributed throughout the notebook so that he could link things together that weren't on consecutive pages. So each one of these symbols is basically a different sort of thematic material. My idea initially was to work with those pieces of paper specifically. This is not good. This is going to take too long. And so I basically notated this stream of symbols throughout 4 or 5 different notebooks. And my idea was to use this information to generate a graphic score for a sound performance. I tried to utilize the way that the marks were made to determine numbers of actions and time equivalents. So with a shape like such as this shape, it would take 6 steps to make the mark, and so it equaled 6, and it would determine 6 minutes or 6 actions. The shape, sometimes the shape of the symbol would determine the object that I would use. And that got kind of, it felt too complete in a way because it was the thing I went to specifically do. So I also, I'm going to go past this because it's going to be very convoluted. This is the sound installation that was basically based on those symbols. And you can see each of the speakers is color-coded, so each action that was related to a specific color went through a different speaker. It sounds really dry, but it's actually really messy. These were notes that were found in the back of one of his notebooks. All of these circular forms were done on top of text, so there's basically a full page of text beneath these symbols. Nobody in the archive knew what they meant. They couldn't determine things like maybe this was a way of organizing paragraphs, or maybe trajectories, this and this might somehow be connected, but none of that seemed to be true. And for the most part, most of my questions were unanswerable. from the archivist, which was great because they were initially it was very intimidating. I mean, I was in a room with a bunch of scholars, and but the archivist really liked me because I asked them questions that no one had ever asked them before. So I initially wanted to make paintings based on these forms, and when I thought about it, I realized that the very first works that I did as an abstract painter was about taking things out of context and placing them inside of a canvas and hoping that they would sort of start to speak differently than they were meant to speak. But in this case, it needed to be more complex. So this is from another notebook. There were a number of colored lines on most of the pieces of paper, and again, trying to organize thematic material. So I organized, again, I notated all of the colors in sequence, and all of these things started to become...
sequence of spectrum? Or?
In the sequence of the notebook. So like if you, like this is, you know, green, yellow, blue, red, orange. And so if you, yeah, so if you, oh, I just messed this up. I knew this wasn't going to be easy this way. I'm trying to make everyone else look more prepared. And so I worked with these, so basically these things became scores. So this is all of the colors in sequence. And so when I got down to making work, whatever I was working on would be sort of in, all of my actions would follow the sort of the way the colors were laid down in sequence. So I'm allowing information that was not supposed to be used towards making a painting, obviously. The other thing that I notated, I'm trying to do this quickly, is I found 40 some odd different ways that he crossed things out. And I built a kind of lexicon of all the different graphic ways that he crossed out words. And I made a video where I named each one of the forms based on the shape of them, and I obliterated the name with the symbol of obliteration. And obviously this triangle looks like a bird, so that was named bird. Here's a bunch of them. So I made some cards. I used the cards to generate images on top of the surfaces of these canvases, layering them and layering them and layering them so that they were being obliterated by other obliterated symbols, obliteration symbols, and those led to sort of these paintings. And so these paintings are a combination of maybe 50 or 60 of the symbols overlaid. And the whole sort of purpose for me in sort of working this way is that obviously I'm very much connected to them intuitively, but also they're decisions that I'm making based on the information that I'm working with, so that I'm partially guiding things and partially letting the source guide me as well. And there's also the one thing I did, I mean, I know I'm not a Benjamin scholar, and I don't really like most of his writings actually, except for 3 things. And one of them is a piece that he wrote about Proust, where he talked about rag picking. And rag pickers at the turn of the century were generally poor people or gypsies who would like go somewhere after a fair or some kind of carnival, and all the stuff that people left on the ground afterwards, they would go and like sift through them and find things that they could use and had meaning, which is exactly what gave me permission to go through somebody's archive and pull things out that nobody else was paying attention to. And so that's sort of what I'm working on and how I work, and that was 5 minutes or less, right?
Thank you.
Sure.
I also have a QuickTime movie that's made up of pictures, so we have that in common.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, my name is Jessica Hyatt, and I'm gonna address some of the themes that are present in my work by showing you photographs of popcorn kernels that I signed with my initials and then popped. And while I do that, I'm going to read some thoughts about object making and the relationship established between the object and the maker. Our minds contain a thread that is constantly aware of who we are in a moment. And when this thread is broken, we do not die, but we are no longer ourselves. The thread may be gone, or it may start up again as though it was never lost. Consider Alzheimer's, amnesia, seizures. We depend on its continuity to experience our consciousness. In order to reconcile ourselves within the moment, we adjust the details of our thread to be seamless. We create an established record, photographs, video, writing, scores, resumes. The extent of our self-documentation is fantastic and unceasing. These entries are other selves, us in the moment that we enacted them, yet we have moved into the future. The words that I am reading to you were once written in the present, and as I say them now, I can only agree that this is how I once felt. I want my thread to be free to re-articulate this emergent statement that is not yet fully composed. Hesitation, fear, uncertainty. These pieces of popcorn are expressed in one explosive moment, and under a similar set of circumstances, they take wildly different form. I am not sure how to be me. I feel myself watching, earnestly, learning what I'm thinking and who I think I am, only when I look back at what I've done, when I read what I've written. Are the circumstances of my life significant to what I'm saying? My feelings in a future present won't necessarily relate to these words. I know this because I have also stared in disbelief at my most sincere thoughts reported. My failures and successes, my pedigree, my choices, they contribute to how you experience me, but only as I express them to you or as you find them. How many times did I edit this paragraph? I would like to have 1,000,000 pasts. To do so, I would need to sever the thread, lay the responsibility for any object or gesture that I make in the lap of chance, and become anything that references a me. I'll apply all the details that you might find about me to myself. I'll create past to justify my present actions. I'll be ahistorical. I never felt like the facts were accumulating properly anyhow. I'll dissolve into a neat slice of socio-economic chance determined by my name. Search for me and you can find me. There is one easy way to do it. You can determine how the connections should be traced. Identity must be, as we are, simultaneously fixed and emergent.
So thank you very much, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I was happy to spend the day with many of you here at USC. I want to talk today, since we only have a few minutes, I thought I'd share a few quotations that have sort of shaped the way that I think about many of the issues that connect to the exhibition, that include the value of research and also the kind of values implied, I think, in a research-based practice. And I want to begin with a quotation from Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. This short quotation is from a speech that he delivered at Boston College in 1970. He said, today I ask you to assume, oh, and I should also mention that playing in the background is an excerpt from a video of mine called The Escaped Lunatic, which was made in Houston in 2011.
The Escape from?
The Escaped Lunatic.
The Escaped Lunatic.
Sorry, am I not speaking into the microphone? I'll do better. So Newton said, tonight I ask you to assume that an external world exists, an external world that exists independently of us. The second assumption I would like for you to make is that things are in a constant state of change, transformation, or flux. With agreement on these two assumptions, we can go on with our discussion. And he went on to say, the scientific method relies heavily on empiricism. But the problem with empiricism is that it tells you very little about the future. It tells you only about the past, about information which you have already discovered through observation and experience. As a student of history, Newton was fascinated by the tension between persistence and change. He said, the desert is not a circle, it is a spiral. When we have passed through the desert, nothing will be the same. He often quoted Nietzsche's lyrical metaphor, an arrow of longing for another shore, to describe the activity of the revolutionary. Newton has been on my mind recently, particularly his insistence that the path to a better future lay through a more rigorous present. And then the second quotation is from your least favorite philosopher, Walter Benjamin, on the task of the historian. I don't know if his theses on history fall into, are those one of the essays you approve of?
I think that's for another panel.
Right. So he said, in his theses on the philosophy of history, he said, above all, he must not be afraid, the historian. This is on the task of the historian. He says, above all, he must not be afraid to return again and again to the same matter, to scatter it as one scatters earth, to turn it over as one turns over soil. For the matter itself is no more than the strata which yield their long-sought secrets only to the most meticulous investigation. I think any process of kind of thinking about your work and reflecting on your work is a kind of, in some ways, a historiographic endeavor, an endeavor of excavation, mining your own matter or material, the material that's your work, surrounding your work, in order to understand insights that might otherwise remain hidden. I have sometimes in the past characterized my own practice as at least partially historiographic, which is to say concerned not only with data, information, matter, material, and event, but also with narration itself, with the way that we sort of make our way through the material of our lives. I spend a lot of time in the studio thinking in particular about the future. I'm especially interested in the embattled idea of progress and its cousins, development and uplift. How can we imagine, describe, and represent our lives? I wonder if we lack a model that explains the politics of change. So if models like development or uplift no longer work to explain or to kind of imagine our political futures, sort of what then? How do we even think about change? What does it mean to imagine, describe, and represent in a context in which change is accidental and arbitrary, and meaning seems incidental, redundant, or even absent? What are the political implications of stasis? And much of my work, including that first video I showed, which is part of a series, another work in the series is called Maniac Chase, and both take their titles from a kind of collection of films made during the first decade of the 20th century, in which a kind of maniac escapes from a cell and is chased around the grounds of his asylum, ultimately returning to the cell in a completely kind of cyclical and serial process. And much of my work, I experiment with seriality, with ways of thinking that in which one thing kind of follows another, and the possibilities that those kinds of experimental processes can open up. I don't know how long it's been, but I'll just say this image, these are all part of the same series that's on view in Observer Effect, The Observer Effect. Observer Effect. A series, an ongoing set of works. Some of these take the title If I Could. Others have a title Affirmations for Living, and others are called Untitled Transparency. And they all use the same text as a starting point. The text was originally published as a kind of poem and preface to a fiction novel, a kind of urban fiction novel of the type that are sold outside of my studio on 125th Street. The full text of that poem or inspirational text is as follows. If I could, I would surround myself with people who bring out the best in me. If I could, I would rid myself of the negativity in my life, including friends and significant others. If I could, I would save money for a rainy day. If I could, I would have a kind word for someone each day. If I could, I would do something nice for someone just because. If I could, I would rekindle old friendships. If I could, I would learn to say no. If I could, I would go to the gym and stop talking about going. If I could, I would treat myself to something special each payday because I deserve it. If I could, I would take time for myself, to be with myself, to understand myself. If I could, I would go back to school to take that class I've been putting off. If I could, I would love myself first so that I may love others. If I could, I would do all these things and more. If I could, and I can, so I will. And the text sort of came to my attention when it was mentioned in newspaper accounts of the kind of accidental murder, if such a thing is possible, of a public school student in fall of 2009. His name was Darian Albert, and many of you who were in Chicago at that time are probably familiar with that case. He had kept a copy of that text next to his desk and used it to sort of inspire him while he was doing his work. For those of you who don't know him, he was 16 at the time. He was the 31st Chicago public school student killed that year, since the previous year. Text is obviously intended for adults, written in the present conditional sense. Tense. If I could, I would. Until that final line, which abandons the conditional for the present and future. And I've returned to this text over several years to using acetate often, and many sort of forms of collage to reflect upon juxtaposition and its methods, the arbitrariness of design, illegibility, which is a kind of ongoing interest of mine, and what it means to capture or trap a moment in time, not unlike a death. And it's an ongoing series, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Lorelei and Carrie, for the invitation to be part of the conversation, and thank you, Jessica and Steve and Steffani, for the work that has been part of conversations already with others here. So, and you don't know that, but that's been happening. So thank you.
She makes that.
So in the interest of time, I've prepared a set of comments, so I will read those as this projects behind me. In a sequence of works begun in 1992 and continuing to the present, I've recorded the experience of looking, living, and working within the space of my home. Some of you know, here in Chicago, 1922, two-story brick storefront. It's a residence. It's a site for work. It has a garden for pleasure. The study has unfolded in a natural yet willful progression of paintings and drawings, and I've examined the visual evidence and structural configurations of walls, floors, windows, stairways, and threshold spaces that fluctuate between one kind of familiar recognition and other forms of knowing. They can just as easily surprise me and appear newly strange, even after 20 years of living there. On several occasions, I've described my process as working in reverse to the norm of architectural practice, that is, from house back to plan. Visual and conceptual manifestations of inversion and opposition, doubling, replication have been an integral subtext to my thinking and practice. With time, I've come to recognize that the work functions as an extended archive in both documentary and subjective terms. The entryway and eventually the house itself, its orientation to light and seasonal shift, have evolved into an eccentric compass, a domestic and revelatory kind of GPS device, although obviously obviously an analog version. I become more attentive to the arc of sun through the course of years and seasons. The house frames and clarifies intangible spatial and temporal experiences that attend to time lived, to occupancy within an urban context. I've learned from and I've been challenged to understand what all this means, living inside the subject of my work. Inevitably and fortunately, the private side of home has generated a set of connections to other, more public sites and to an expansive visual and architectural history. Yet I am grounded by the context of living and working here, the intervals found in Chicago, and to the lake that hints at a global and natural relationship. In May of 2011, I was invited to speak to the graduating class of my undergraduate school, Pacific Northwest College of Art, Portland, Oregon. For those who have worked with me, who are here this evening, you already know of my interest in writing. And for that address, I referenced the experience of keeping pace, keeping track of a studio process, of looking and making. In my comments entitled Notes from the Studio, I offered a sequence of selected observations, one passage for each year since 1975. Wallace Stevens is among the many writers, artists, composers, friends, and teachers whose words I've recorded in these very journals. Wallace Stevens, The House Was Quiet and the World Was Calm. These are just a few excerpts from a longer poem. The reader leaned above the page, wanted to lean, wanted much to be the scholar to whom the book is true. The house was quiet because it had to be. The quiet was part of the meaning, part of the mind. Thanks.
Thank you. So I could listen to you guys all day long. We should have given you 25 minutes each. That was fantastic.
Thank you. I agree. I make notes like crazy when we're all talking.
Yeah, hopefully you guys can ask each other lots of questions. But maybe I'll just, I don't know, Carrie, did you have a first question that you wanted to point to, or?
Sure. I'll start off with the microphone. I guess the first question that we have for you is, how do you see your work? And anyone can answer this, and you can answer it in any way you want to. And I think you kind of already have answered this in different points. How do you see your work connecting to the scientific principle of the observer effect and this show? And maybe relating to other work in the show?
Could I see the list that you read?
The
about
list?
the scientific method?
Yeah, it starts on the bottom of the first page and goes to the second.
There was something in that.
And
So it's right at the very bottom of the line
I guess
you're right.
in addition to that, I just would say that something that I kind of, or a phrase that has stuck in my head for years that kind of helped me to initiate the idea of this show was that the observer is part of the system that's being observed, which is part of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle observer effect. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I mean, I would even just say, how would you relate to other works in the show?
So So one is the observer effect and the other is the scientific method, because I tried to distinguish between the two things.
Well, someone
He's gonna
else
study.
can answer this.
I'll take a stab. This is a stab, but I've been really interested in that as well, and how kind of a cloud of infinite possibilities will collapse in a moment into something, and how within that collapse there has to be an observation, or there has to be like a test or a moment of viewing in order to create the thing that's being observed. And I'm particularly interested in that and how it relates to identity. I think we all have like really different ways of thinking about how that moment is happening. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there for now.
Now I did this.
Or, I mean, I could expand a little bit more too. In thinking about like how you try to allow yourself to be perceived or formed through information, and like looking at other people and what they say about themselves, and my process of observing what they're saying about themselves. And I'm referring to other people with my name, which is what a lot of my work in the show is about, which I didn't address directly in the explanation or the discussion, the talk that I just gave. I think that what I've found happening is that within like my observance of these other women with my name, and then this sort of role play that I take on to make some of these objects, the act of, I mean, the line where I'm thinking about what they would make and what I would make, and it's really, I can look back now and see how that's really changed my decision making. So like I guess that's not entirely clear, but the act of witnessing them and thinking about them has affected me. It has affected like how people observe me now. Like I am actually the owner of many horse things, which is really strange. But I made the horse painting that's in the show based on photographs from another woman's horse that I've slowly, legitimately fallen in love with. And so like becoming a horse lover based on somebody else's love for horses has been maybe an example of how seriously you can be affected by observing things.
But am I correct that that individual is Jessica as well?
Yes.
And in your, can I ask?
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you met very many of them personally?
No.
Okay.
None. I could have said that I had communicated with none of them up until about a month ago, but I did attempt to make contact with one who I would like to work with in a project. And she's not responded, but we're Facebook friends now, so she can see a little bit more about me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first time that that's happened. So.
That's interesting. Thanks. That was a question that had sort of floated through as I looked at the work and thought about what I read about the work, was when and how one negotiates the discussion with someone with your name.
Well, I purchased a painting that another woman named Jessica Hyatt made online, and that was as close as I had come to having that type of contact. The person who was selling the painting was like a third party, someone who I think was friends with Jessica Hyatt. And I received an email from him saying, Jessica, I was so excited that your painting sold, and then so surprised to see that you bought it. Why are you in Chicago? And I was like, oh, like, I didn't know how to respond, and so I didn't respond to the email. But But yeah, like the places that we do abut, and now especially even with the discussion like this tonight, which, you know, is more public and open, and with information gathering online, I think that those abutments and those intersections are going to become really, I think they're going to become the place where the work really actualizes.
Did you want to talk about the question that Carrie asked?
It's a great,
Can move on to the next one.
Because I was thinking about when you said natural but willful, and then I wanted to kind of think about whether you felt like that connected to what we are proposing as the subjective and connected to the investigative.
well, yes. As I read and thought about this question, the natural part is the day-to-day. So if you're, maybe one reason I had the questions for Jessica was it's a little bit, you know, when is the house not me and when is the subject mine and when is it not ever going to be mine? Will there be part of this site that I inhabit that I won't be able to deal with, or that it's not a Facebook friend and it's not someone with my name, but there was something about thinking about sort of multiple parts of self that I think I connected to that in a way. So natural is the day-to-day and willful is deciding to do something with the information that I confront every day, or that I mean, the way the house has unfolded, it's been very gradual. It was natural in that I didn't see it coming, and then gradually I've started to understand that I can structure thinking by using the house as a filter to think with, and then also using whatever the work of the materials of the work help me think about this site as well.
I think it's just something that came up repeatedly through the presentations was many of you talked about uncertainty, or that kind of an ambiguous moment, or just now, like when things butt up against one another that don't quite make sense. And I guess I don't know if this is a question or just a thought. I mean, to me, like in my work, I feel like my work isn't complete until I've hit that awkward moment, or I feel like that's what the best work hits, this really awkward moment. And uncertainty is really an important place in the work. Yeah, I don't know how to, and if anyone wants to think about that.
I mean, I don't think it's, I mean, I think certain people work in ways where they have an idea and they fabricate the idea into an object, and it fulfills their expectations, right? When I start a project or a body of work, I'm usually interested in a thing of some kind, and I want to have a conversation with it, but I don't want to tell it what to do, and I don't want it to conform to my project. You know, I want it to aid me in expanding my vocabulary and my thinking, and so that the next thing is more evolved than the last thing, or less evolved than the last thing. You know, so that my conversation with the material somehow allows me to somehow move to another place, whether it's more evolved or less evolved is neither here nor there. It needs to shift things for me so that things that I never anticipated would become very important, and things that I initially was interested in fall away, you know, so that the thing doesn't have to, I don't have to drive the thing to the place where I want it to be. I need to, I mean, this gets esoteric, but I'm from California. You know, there are moments where you simply relinquish yourself to the information, and then things start happening in a very different way. And for me, it's about taking control away from myself, or having other determiners within the work to sort of tell me what to do at times. And then what's great about it, because it is like a relationship with a person, is we argue and we don't always like each other. And sometimes we work together really well, you know. And I feel like if I, even with my talk, I mean, had I planned the talk and read the talk, it would have not felt like how I would want to be as a person. So my working process has to allow for things to happen that are unexpected, and also for the whole thing to shift. I mean, I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about failure and as being very important as a potential in the work, so that it could break down and fall apart, and I'd have to start over. I mean, everything that I make isn't necessarily wonderful. So when something breaks down, then it gives you the possibility of building something new up. So I think, I mean, for me, the idea of science is that you start an inquiry because you have a sense of what you're looking for. And when you're just a guy in his garage making stuff, you don't really always know what you're looking for until you actually find it. And that's the beauty of being an artist and not being a scientist. I mean, I'd be giving a very different talk if I was a scientist, I think.
So Steffani, I was wondering if maybe there was some way you wanted to connect this to some of the things you talked about in your presentation. I think early on you had said that you think in a research-based practice there are certain kind of values implied in that, and I was interested in hearing more about that, and I wonder if that connects to some of what we're talking about, or maybe it's a whole other tangent.
Yeah, it might be a tangent. I was thinking a lot of, sorry. It might be a tangent. I was thinking about the history of the word research and its function as a kind of Enlightenment concept. I think it was first used in English in the 16th century, and the idea that the implication of first there's the implication of kind of unconcealing. Or bringing something to light, and in addition to that kind of tenuous, looking for something but not knowing where the answer might be, that I think is also implied in the search route to research. But I was also thinking about just the at that moment in the 16th century, and during the kind of emergence of the emergence of, or the kind of crystallization of the fine arts, for example, and the emergence of many kind of related fields of thought that we now consider, we now call the humanities, as well as the sciences. Just thinking about kind of the way that they all require a kind of, or that they foreground the kind of interface between our kind of between the kind of public world on the one hand, and then our kind of really powerful subjectivity on the other, and provide these different ways for systematizing that encounter, and that I think the way that modern art has evolved has really kind of profound parallels with the evolution of all of these other forms of thought. Like it's really impossible to disentangle them, and that's kind of what I was thinking about. In terms of how it connects, I have no clue, but.
You guys definitely all have kind of this body of things that you mine for your work, and I was wondering, okay, so on the one hand, you are the observer undertaking this process of observation. What is the role of the observer as the viewer? in your work? What role do we have? How transparent are you about what you're doing in your sources? And how important is it that we can connect to that versus how does your work maybe materially stand alone? Maybe you give us some clues through a title. Like, what do you do to take us to your source, or is that important?
Okay, I'm not going to be able to repeat all of that, Paula. That was really nice. So I think what Paula's asking is that each of you has a kind of set of things that you mine, and how do we get to what's the role? So ultimately, she's asking, what do you think is the role of the viewer? How do you get the viewer, the observer outside your artwork, not you, to understand that set of references and original material that you're exploring?
I'd like to answer that.
I'll answer after you. I'm excited about that question.
Personally, I don't think any of it is important for the observer. Some of my favorite...
You mean a viewer?
Yeah.
A viewer?
Yeah, I mean, I think my baggage is generally my baggage. And I mean, I've made work, again, from one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century, and I've made work based on my grandmother dying. And both of those experiences fueled so much for me in terms of how things had been, like how I make decisions. And I think a lot about the Four Seasons paintings that Jasper Johns made. They're some of my favorite paintings. And at the time those paintings were sort of written about and published and shown, he sort of got his ass kicked for making those paintings because they were, quote unquote, too hermetic, too much rooted in biography, and there wasn't enough reveal for people in terms of what's going on and I need to know. I hate that as an experience. I don't want to know. I want to stand in front of the thing and have a conversation with it the same way I do with the raw materials. And I'm trying to offer the same kind of experience. There are things in the work that's very important to me that I don't feel it's necessary to share. On the other hand, I've had responses to work where the stuff was somehow revealed because somebody intuited it from it. But at least you don't have to have special tools to engage with the work. And for me, that's a huge issue. I like when my mom comes to my studio and she knows nothing about what I'm doing and she can be engaged with the paintings. And my favorite art experience I ever had was seeing the Jackson Pollock survey in New York like 15 years ago. And there was a guy who was painting ahead of me the whole time I was going through the show. And he stopped in front of every painting and waited till he saw a bird in the painting and yelled out really loud, "That's a bird." And it's like a kind of a hilarious story, but it was really amazing because he was so into it, and he literally went through every single painting looking for a bird. And it's easy to sort of go like, well, he must have been a hick or something, but for the most part, it was like he spent more time than most of the other people in the space. He was fully engaged with what he was looking at. Jackson Pollock was already dead, so it was pretty wonderful, And I think there's so much emphasis, especially, I went to grad school and I teach grad school, and there's so much emphasis on sort of viewing everything through this kind of academic lens that for me it sort of kills the poetry and the beauty of the experience. Not every time or in everything, but for my own work, I think it's really important that there's something there for most people. I'm not making rainbows and puppies, but it's like I think there should be something there for people, not to create distance. I think distance is one of the worst part of the art world in terms of the whole system as well as the way like artworks perform in certain environments. So for me, this issue comes up all the time because when I give a real talk, I break down my systems, I talk about the sort of history of the objects, and it's a whole long thing, and it just dries it all out, And I'm not making early silhouette work. I love early silhouette work, but I don't want to, I'm too messy, and I can't use a ruler really, so that's my thought.
Well, I guess I'd like to give the opposite answer, which is that I kind of agree with everything that you said, and I feel like I my work is about this struggle of like how you relate an object back to the author. And so, this idea of the viewer coming in and seeing the object and then creating this narrative about who the author is that kind of becomes the locus of my work. And so unwittingly, I think I became like the performer of the work, and that actually becomes more important than the objects. I'm not a performer, so like we're all performers, I guess. Maybe that's another. Maybe I am a performer, and so like this idea that I'm not performing myself, or I am performing myself, or like I'm smarter than myself because I'm like doubling over that somehow is there's a lot of absurdity there, and I think that unfortunately watching me struggle with that is part of what makes my work relevant. So
You're faking this out.
yeah, but I'm telling you, but not really. I'm only telling you right now. Yeah, I am faking you out, and but I'm also I very much agree with this idea that we need something to tell us what to do, or we need to unfurl something into an object, and what the content that we're creating from is that the idea of there being content that we're creating from is absurd. And so, I think the whole thing can be a fake out. Like, people make paintings or objects that are very much put on the wall and read as like a one-to-one, the artist made this, but they're faking you out too, because they know how that link is going to be created. Like, they're making objects to create a history for themselves as well.
I thought you were excited to talk, Carrie.
Yeah, I was, but I'd prefer it if the panelists had a chance first.
But don't you?
Yeah, you should.
Don't you think? Can I make a little footnote?
You go for it. Yeah.
I mean, don't you think in the case of your work that, let's say, the fact that all the people with your name are sort of part of what's going on, and in my case, like my grandmother dying, the work you don't need to know that to sort of enter my project.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, to be clear, I wasn't advocating for like my way.
I would advocate for your way.
But I
Openly.
But I think there's a lot of work where it's very important that you understand the umbrella that it exists within, and then there's other work where you just don't need to know that. I think.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, but I think that this kind of human nature association that we make through the object back to you. I mean, I think in some ways we're saying something very similar.
Yeah, but I think there are certain kinds of work that once there's like a reveal, the work ends in terms of the experience that you can have. It's like a political statement or a joke, or it's something where there's like such a harsh resolve once you know what's going on. It's really hard to kind of maintain whatever you were experiencing at the beginning. And I think that's, to me that's a very important thing.
I think that's really important to me too. I think the only place that I would disagree is in this idea of whether or not the viewer needs to watch us, the artist, be using observation in the making, and so without challenging your process. In fact, I really respect the way that you're choosing to negotiate that. That would be like very much in line, but the opposite side of how I think I choose to negotiate it.
Yeah.
So I think in your case, it's necessary, or not necessary, but it does shut down the work if you
it just directs the wrong kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think, at least for myself, that it's very difficult to talk about the work in any way other than process. You know, this is how I go about and do these things. And so that can be part of the conversation, but I think that there's stuff that I wouldn't want to speak about that is present in the work that no one can really access, I think, or most people. And so if I sort of changed the language and made those things more prominent, that would be the conversation. You know, like, and that would be, I mean, I don't want to make examples of things like that I hate, but to me, I would equate it with like film music. You know, it tells you exactly how to feel when you're supposed to feel it, and you're being completely manipulated.
Right. So I've been listening and thinking that, and I'll include Carrie, your work in this as well, and that maybe what we're all speaking about is that we've found a partner, or we've established a kind of partnership with some other subject, and that other subject has challenged the hand or the eye or an aesthetic skill or that there's something outside ourselves that is a partner and helps keep stylization in check or something. You said something about the information, uncertainty equaling awkwardness, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's the most gorgeous or the most pleasing, but that the uncertainty is a challenge to habit. Maybe that's a better way to say it than aesthetics, that the information is just so stubborn, or as a partner, that we each have to deal with some other thing that keeps us in check, challenges habit.
I think that awkwardness is actually a positive, and I meant that in a positive way.
It's direct, honest. I mean, honest. I shouldn't say the word. Yeah.
I mean, I think that subject matter for me is a way to get outside of myself, and it makes the work more generative.
Yes. You get to think through it. Yes,
yeah. It's like, I mean, when I'm a little stuck in my studio, I like to. Well, this is just nerdy. I always do this like every time I publicly speak, like make some nerdy comment. But I mean, I just love to like cut images out and index them. And I have a file. It's like the secret file of Carrie's index.
It's out now. We all know about it.
You can come over and find like, you know, the nebula file. And anyway, but I don't think my work is about astronomy really. I mean, I think it's just like a starting point. And to me, the observation, like there's my observation of the subject matter, but there's also, I mean, I think that it's equally important, the audience or the viewer's observation of me observing the other, you know, observing material too. I mean, so I think there's like a multiple, like observation kind of thing that I'm really interested in, like multiple points of observation.
Deanna, go ahead. I'm gonna condense it when I repeat it.
Start writing.
Do you want to come use the microphone, Deanna?
So one of the things that I observed when I listened in the presentation, but also in the work, it's an oscillation between intelligibility and inintelligibility, between decipherability and things that are not really decipherable, because hopefully nobody will tell us how to read them and understand them. So I just want to comment that what Steve said makes a lot of sense to me on many, many levels. And it's perhaps a mantra of sorts in the studio. But I just wanted to bring it to the succinct way in which Wallace Stevens said it, which was that the only way you would understand his poetry is if you wrote it. So I think it's a conversation what do we mean when we understand the work of art? And is it that understanding would be static? And I think that perhaps scientists share that in some sense, because even when the answer might be revealed, there's moving on to the next question. Anyway, there's no question there. Maybe. But just say.
So I hope that people will respond, but I'm going to try and say what you said, which was very eloquent. So I think what you said that you identified in the work in the exhibition is that there's an oscillation between intelligibility and unintelligibility, and that Steve's comment makes sense to you and maybe could be a mantra, but that maybe a way to think is that Wallace Stevens' statement that the only way to understand a poem is to write it, right? Okay. But that led you to the question of what does it mean when we understand a work of art, and that there is potentially a way in which scientists share this. Does that cover it? Okay. I tried to write very quickly. So, responses to her, not my butchering of it.
I mean, I think that that's a really interesting observation. I think a lot about intelligibility. There's a really excellent quotation that I cannot remember by Rox Media Collective, the New Delhi-based artist collective, regarding the ways that they use the phrase illegibility, but regarding the ways that the kind of the space between legibility and illegibility. The ways that becomes a tremendously productive kind of interpretive space. It's the only place where interpretation is at stake. It's a way of making that kind of activity of whether it's the activity of kind of interpretation or the activity of understanding of giving that activity weight and forcing it to be kind of at issue for each individual person who approaches the work. I think I've thought a lot about, earlier Steve used the kind of metaphor of conversation to describe the relationship between you as the maker and your materials, I think. And I think a lot about that metaphor. And I don't know how much you guys thought about kind of phenomenology related language as a kind of way of kind of thinking about or interfacing between this kind of concern with observation on the one hand and thinking about the kind of activity of interpretation or on the other hand. But I think a lot about, Gadamer in particular wrote about, and sorry that I think in these quotations, but it's just whatever. Gadamer wrote really, I think in a really interesting way about how using this metaphor of the horizon to describe, and the kind of meeting of horizons to describe the greatest kind of opportunity that conversation can offer. So it's not about, for him, it's not just about kind of identification, like you can only understand the poem if you wrote it, but rather about the idea that there's that this is as far as I can see, and then you behold the work, and there's kind of as far as you can see, and then there's that kind of zone where those overlap, and that's the kind of zone of exchange, and that's kind of the most that you can hope for in terms of interaction with another person. He said, he talked about how he used conversation as a kind of model for explaining the way that we can't totally, just as you were saying, and I think everyone has said, that you can't completely control the parameters of that encounter. That he said something like, you can't conduct a conversation, the conversation conducts you, or something like that, to describe the fact that it has almost this kind of independent agency, and that those kinds of encounters really sort of come into being, rather than being something that we can kind of directly anticipate, and as artists, we kind of establish this horizon and the kind of set of possibilities for exchange with someone who might encounter the work. And those possibilities are vast. You know, they're broad. It's not like a point or even a line. It's like a plane. It's huge. It's maybe way beyond what we can even kind of individually, particularly imagine. And then someone kind of encounters that work and also brings their kind of plane, and there are these moments where they intersect. Anyway, many mixed metaphors, but I hope that speaks to some of your interests.
It's beautiful.
Do we have other questions or comments? Chris.
So you began by talking about the scientific method, and part of that is our making hypothesis. So I was wondering if anyone on the panel, this is a general question, if anyone can describe what they do in terms of a hypothesis and then an experimental results, or that's something that's too articulated.
Okay, so just to repeat, Chris was referencing how I talked about the scientific method, and the first part is to basically state a hypothesis, and that he wondered if I could identify in your work a hypothesis, and then what the second step would be, can you kind of describe what the resulting examination or experiment might be?
I wonder if I might respond by making an observation about the exhibition in relation to this, which is I reflected on what is shared. I mean, it's one of the most diverse in appearance, one of the most diverse presentations of work. And it's related to the question in that it seems that the way each of the individuals in the exhibition, not only those present tonight, but that there are multiple answers to the hypothesis or the question, and that there's a set of works, or if there's just one work, embedded in that work is a set of interrogations that lead to a way of visualizing something. So, but what really struck me was that there were very few singular works, or if there was a singular work, like Steve's film, I'm being asked as an observer viewer to engage multiple kinds of work that reflect on each other as your practice, and so there is no winner. And there is no one right answer, and even embedded, I think, in many of the works is there's a two-partness, or there's a multi-voiced presence in the work. Your stacks of things are, there's no one hierarchy. And that seems related to this idea of inquiry and research. I mean, there's searching, and then I guess I wrote, when you were talking about research, I realized I've never looked up that definition, and so I was kind of, wheels were going, and so you go search for something, and then if you have to go back again, you have to research it, right? You have to go back again, and so that going back again is like another kind of looking or another kind of thinking, and if we're really lucky, that thing that we're looking at unpacks and gives us multiple ways to see it. So I don't know if that goes partly to your question about the hypothesis, but if we're lucky to get the good question, then we at least have something to go to work with.
Yeah, it seems like a starting point more than anything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
I think for myself, like when I was working in the Benjamin archives, after maybe 2 weeks, I was there for 6 weeks. After 2 weeks, I had sort of done what I wanted to do, and it was not very fulfilling. And the third week, I actually started to find some other things that were interesting, but by the fourth week, I was completely, I was like, there's nothing else here for me. There's just nothing. I mean, I've gone through everything. You know, it was like thousands of pieces of paper. There was a lot, but I couldn't.
Who's like done with the thing? I mean,
Yeah, I couldn't even read my favorite text because it was in German. But there are these really wonderful moments of frustration, which was a word I think somebody used, where it feels like there's nothing. You know, like you've taken everything out of this source and there's just nothing there. And then somehow you find something else, and it's not just like a little strand. It's like a whole other thing opening up, and that, you know, kind of relentlessness. It for me, it's sort of, again, it's a little bit antithetical to the idea of resolve or understanding. It's more about somehow finding ways for the thing to continue opening up and unfolding. I mean, you know, you're proof of it with your project. I mean,
Been very fortunate.
and I think you know, that's, if you're going to converse with inanimate objects, you have to find ways for that to happen.
Well, they present themselves, they become animated, you know.
Yeah,
They
I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
embodied.
Okay, so I think maybe we have time for one more question or comment. Did you guys want to ask a question of each other as the last question?
I have so many, I don't know where.
I bet you do. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you all for the exhibition.